Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the Legacy on Chain, where the next chapter of Legacy is written on chain. And today we are going to be discussing private and public blockchains. I stumbled on a post by a lady called Danelle Dixon, who is the CEO of the Stellar Development Foundation. And she published this post on the 6th of October, which was just a few days ago. And she titled it, "Let's Build Open Highways, Not Railroads." And guys, I absolutely loved this post, absolutely loved it. She spoke about private blockchains that are being built by a lot of banking groups as railroads. She likened them to railroads. And then companies such as hers and Ripples and IOTA, she likened to open highways. And the reason why she speaks of these as open highways is because they are basically public blockchains which they are building essentially, and the banking groups and banking families are basically building private siloed railroads. Now, it's very interesting because, as you can imagine, most of these things, when we speak of highways and railroads, these are major infrastructures in any country, any country. So I'm based in the United Kingdom, and of course, over here we call them motorways, right? But if you think about it logically, motorways transport more people than railroads, right? So there are more people on the motorways or highways than there are on trains, essentially, right? So how I read this was that basically a lot of value will be transmitted on this kind of infrastructure, on the open motorways, on the open highways, as opposed to the railroads. Now, let's look at the railroads, which we are using as an analogy of the private blockchains. What kind of private blockchains will exist in the future of finance? Right. So here we are looking at Swift, and most people would recognize Swift. You have a Swift code, which you would probably see at the bottom of your bank statement or your bank account. You have a Swift code that is attached to every bank account. And Swift essentially is a communication layer, right? It basically communicates information from one bank to another bank. But look what this says here, right? Swift to add blockchain based ledger to its infrastructure stack in groundbreaking move to accelerate and scale benefits of digital finance across more than 200 countries and territories worldwide. So, guys, coming back to the original post in which Danelle Dixon made, you can then see that these kind of railroads, right, which are private blockchains. So Swift is a co-op essentially, right? It is a cooperative of many banks that have come together to kind of essentially unilaterally have a place where they are able to communicate information. It's a messaging layer. That's what Swift is, right? So essentially, they will have railroads in 200 countries, right? And territories worldwide. And this is obviously speaking of the new blockchain that Swift is basically going to adopt. Now look at the language that it used, guys. It says to its infrastructure stack in a groundbreaking move. Guys, this has never been done before, right? Now look what it says, to accelerate and scale benefits benefits of digital finance across more than 200 countries. So guys, we are when we're talking about, railroads and motorways, we are talking about global infrastructure. That's what this is right now, right? So private and public blockchains are global financial infrastructure or infrastructures of tomorrow. Now, it's very interesting, guys, because most times within the crypto community, people look and call these things speculative assets, and there is this bullish and bearish sentiment. But all of that is just very short-sighted, very, very short-sighted. What we are talking about are essentially the motorways and the train stations, right, of the future of finance, essentially. So it's really, really interesting. Such an amazing blog post that Danelle Dixon had made here. I'll read this part just to give some context as to what she is saying. She says, in the 1880s, railroad barons didn't just own trains. They owned the only way to move goods across America. Farmers had no choice but to accept whatever rates the railroads charged, often surrendering a substantial share of their crop value in transportation costs, right? So she's likening this to most of the private blockchains basically will be able to set their own costs, and retail, I'm going to use farmers as an analogy of retail, had no choice but to accept whatever rates the private banking conglomerates charged. Very, very interesting, right? But guys, what we need to understand is that blockchain itself is an infrastructure, right? So here in the bold, she says, but blockchain isn't another application layer to be captured, right, by banking conglomerates. It's like the internet. Blockchain is the infrastructure itself, which is really, really amazing, right? So I'm going to go a bit further down. She basically goes on to say that, because Stellar itself, Stellar blockchain is a public blockchain, right? And when I speak about public blockchains, it is permissionless, meaning that anybody can build on their tech stack, right? And of course, we still use that analogy of being on a motorway. What does a motorway do? It allows people to transport goods and value, right? So the railroads that she is speaking about, which are the private banking conglomerates that are building private blockchains, she says that we're fighting to keep what should be open infrastructure from becoming private property. This is amazing. So when you see stuff like this, guys, this was just a couple of days ago. Also, Swift and a group of more than 30 financial institutions globally will develop a shared digital ledger with initial focus on real-time 24/7 cross-border payments, right? Swift will work with Consensus on a conceptual prototype of the ledger, which will leverage Swift's unmatched resiliency, security, and scalability to facilitate transactions using any form of regulated tokenized value, which is amazing, right? So we can see Swift are basically going to start their own blockchain. It's not just them, right? So now here we are on Connexus, which is another private blockchain by JP Morgan. So JP Morgan also won in on this action, right? And they've titled it the next generation of financial infrastructure, or next generation financial infrastructure. Now, guys, I want to make an analogy, right? When I talk about railroads, right? Let me pull this picture up. When we're talking about railroads, in the brown, let's look at it like this. These are major infrastructures in the future of finance. So the brown speaks about the railroads, private blockchain networks, right? But they are siloed, right? They are siloed, meaning they are isolated, right? So JP Morgan has its own, Swift has its own, Hyperledger has its own. And of course, there are oracles that are being built, interoperability networks that are being built to allow some of these private blockchains to be able to communicate with one another. But as far as it goes, they want to be siloed, right? But the problem is that they have customers, right, who have value or share value with the larger world, which is where we get public blockchains, right? So people like Ripple, Stellar, IOTA, right? Now, it's very, very interesting, guys, right? Because what we're seeing is that the public blockchains, even though they carry tremendous value, right? Remember, we used the analogy of public blockchains being like highways, right? So these are the highways and this is the railroads. These are where the train tracks, the train stations, and here you have, of course, the highways. Now, the special thing about Ripple and Stellar, right, is that they are not just public blockchains. They have an added layer to them. They have liquidity layers, right, which will enable some of these private blockchains to essentially bring value from here to the end customer, right? To the end customer. So you can imagine if JP Morgan is moving billions, Swift is communicating billions or transacting billions, especially with what we just read, that they are basically now looking at cross-border payments. Hyperledger also. Ripple has something called the RippleNet. So the RippleNet will enable the highway to link with the railroad, right? And it's not just Ripple, Stellar also. I think Stellar has an AMM, right? Which will allow most of these private blockchains to be able to transact and to send value across, right? So really and truly, there should be an arrow that goes here and there should be an arrow that comes here, which is amazing, right? So guys, when you are buying XRP and you are buying XLM, and by the way, this is non-financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor and I'm not advising anybody to buy anything. But when you are buying the native assets of these blockchains, right, you need to understand that what you are buying is infrastructure, right? The same way you have here in green, these are the motorways, these are the railroads. Think about in the United Kingdom, if there was no motorways, if there was no railroads, there would be no system, right? These are all systems, right? Likewise in America, I know you guys call your motorways highways, and these would be the railways, right? Now, what essentially is happening is that I'll go back to the Swift, I'll go back to Connexus by JP Morgan, is there is now an upgrade, right, to the financial system. Why? Because the financial system before or currently is very archaic and very dated, right? And I want to use that analogy of it being like a locomotive train, right? Very slow, just very outdated, really, right? But what is happening now is that with most of these banking conglomerates, Citi also, who are looking at the next generation of blockchain technology infrastructure, right? They are upgrading from locomotive trains to high-speed trains, right? Where they will be able to send value very quickly, right? Things will be tokenized very quickly, right? So the financial world that we are moving into is changing very rapidly, right? So don't get caught, guys, in this whole concept of buying and what's bullish and what's not bullish and what's bearish. It's all a trap. You are investing in infrastructure. Look at this, right? Swift to add blockchain-based ledger. Guys, I need you to understand, this was at their Cybos conference, right? Just a few days ago. And they made a massive announcement. And you can imagine, all the people here in this photo are all part of banking companies, big banking conglomerate companies, right? Because Swift is a messaging layer that most banks across the globe all use, right? And they are doing a big presentation on the announcement of Swift now adopting blockchain technology. Look what it says: the next frontiers of global finance. So it's amazing. I mean, I'll read a bit of this, and we'll move into something else. It says, at Swift, our mission has always been to continually innovate and elevate the cross-border payments experience. Today, we are taking a pivotal step forward, adding a blockchain-based shared ledger to our technology infrastructure. Right? I told you guys it was announced at the Cybos conference in Frankfurt. Right? And I think this is their CEO that announced this, which is amazing, right? Look what it says: setting a new benchmark for digital payments. So guys, it's amazing. What is going on right now is absolutely amazing. And believe me when I tell you, Ripple has a big and a huge and a significant part to play in all of this, right? Ripple also has something called RippleNet, where they have something called on-demand liquidity, right? Which will literally provide liquidity in an instant, right? So it's speaking about sending cross-border payments in real time. So guys, a lot of these private blockchains, they will need to interoperate with private blockchains. They will, because the public blockchains will be where the majority of retail will be, right? And banking doesn't exist without retail. Which is amazing, So you can see here some of the customers that Ripple have, some good financial institutions. I can see there, I think HSBC, DZ Bank, Archax is really, really big in the UK, Travelex, quite a number of partners that Ripple do have. I think I saw Santander somewhere, BBVA, and it goes on. It literally does go on, So you can see they've got active licenses at the moment in 64 countries, pending jurisdictions right now, 11. So Ripple are doing some big things, man. Big things. And guys, I just really want you to understand that when you are investing, you are buying the native assets to these blockchains, that you are literally a shareholder in tomorrow's infrastructure. That's the truth. Just looking to see if there's anything else here that I want to touch upon. So you can see here, Ripple says that they are building the internet of value, right? Enabling the world to move more value, right? Remember what I said, guys, about value being moved on the motorways, on the highways, the way information moves today, right? So basically, money will be moving at the speed of an email, literally. Somebody's in China, another person's in America, they will get money instantaneously. Somebody's in Jamaica, another person's in, I don't know, where would I say, Germany, they'll get the money like an email, literally, instantaneously. So amazing stuff that's going on here. In the next episode, I'm going to probably go into a bit more further detail in regards to this analogy. And I think it's a wonderful analogy that Denell Dixon pointed out of open highways and not closed railroads, right? It's a wonderful, wonderful analogy that she has used there, because when you think of motorways and highways and railroads, these are major pivotal infrastructure in any country. So now what we are looking at is looking at it within the ecosystem, the financial ecosystem, and the plumbing and the infrastructure that will basically exist in tomorrow's world. So yeah, I think I want to probably end this video here. Love what Danelle Dixon has put here. You know, she says, why open infrastructure serves everyone better. You know, and guys, let me say this, because you know, the public blockchains, right, will serve the majority of retail, right? So the private blockchains will allow those companies to essentially upgrade their systems, right? But where the value will flow will be on the public blockchains. Believe that, right? Especially with Ripple and Stellar, and what I said about the level of the liquidity layers, right? These are liquidity layers, right? That will enable these private blockchains to essentially get to your high street banks, subsequently to get to the end customer, which is you and I. All right, guys, I'm going to end this video here, and I will go into a bit more detail into the next video. But once again, the next chapter of Legacy is written on chain. Hope you learned something amazing in this video, and look forward to seeing you in the next one. Peace.